back to BNC Live. I'm Tishani Whitlow. All right, here's a question that we've been getting from viewers. Could your boss, or better yet, can your boss force you to get a COVID vaccine in order to return to work? All right, well, here to help us break it all down because life has started to return to normal. Joining us now is BNC Chief Legal Correspondent Dr. Laura McNeil to answer all your burning questions. So, Dr. Laura, the most recent city, better yet, New York, the Mayor Bill de Blasio will soon require all city employees be vaccinated. Can he do this?
He can. It's well established in the law in terms of legal precedent that employers, private and public, can mandate the vaccine as a condition of employment. We've seen that for years in the medical industry, hospitals requiring the flu vaccine for all medical workers. And so this is something that is definitely legal. Obviously, it's creating quite a political storm, but in terms of strict legal application, the mayor is perfectly within his rights.
Okay, so is he also within his rights to mention, or better yet, encourage that private companies require employees to also be vaccinated?
He can. He's not requiring private companies to do that. He's simply using his political power to encourage him. Again, no legal issues there. I'm really surprised, to be honest, that people have not done this a lot sooner, all things considered, in terms of encouraging private employers to do so. But what will be interesting to see is those employees that are resisting vaccine mandates, will they walk away from their jobs? Will they try to find some other legal avenue not to be vaccinated? Based on the current precedent, they really don't have a lot of options, Tishani.
All right, and Dr. Laura, what about vaccinated people? Because we're seeing this more and more. Vaccinated folks are, they're in this group of breakthrough cases where they're being reinfected again. Let's say that happens, to unfortunately happen at work. What right does an employee have in terms of a legal argument?
Yeah, unfortunately, they don't have any legal arguments. There is a rise, unfortunately, in breakout cases of fully immunized or vaccinated people, unfortunately, still contracting COVID-19. And because of the PrEP Act, that is a federal statute that gives companies like Pfizer, like Moderna, total legal immunity if something goes wrong with their vaccines. If someone has an adverse reaction, you cannot sue Moderna. You also cannot sue the FDA. A lot of people ask me all the time, Tishani, well, it's just emergency approval. It's not fully approved, so why can't I sue my employer for making me get this vaccine? Or why can't I sue the companies? Because it still only has emergency authorization. Well, under that PrEP Act, the law says no, you can't. And the reason why is they want to make sure that when we're in a crisis like a pandemic, that pharmaceutical companies don't shy away from saying, you know what, we're going to make a vaccine that can hopefully help millions of people. We don't want to be in fear of liability if there's a misstep along the way.
All right, and Dr. Laura, I know this is another question that some of our viewers actually posed. Let's say I'm back at work, I catch COVID, I gotta go out, obviously to isolate, recover. Is my employer required to pay me for that time that I'm home recovering, especially if I caught COVID on the job?
That's an important question as well. If you had asked me this question before January 1st of this year, I would have said absolutely, Tishani. Under the CARES Act, the employers are required to compensate employees for sick leave during COVID or as a result of COVID. It can't count towards your existing sick time. But unfortunately, President Biden chose not to further that particular Coronavirus Act or the CARES Act, and that shield that employees have no longer exists. So now if you are sick with COVID-19, it's optional. It's completely up to your employer whether or not they're going to pay you for that time off. Legally, the only thing they are required to do is nothing. You would have to use existing sick time or vacation time. So you can imagine that puts a lot of employees in a really tough position.
Wait, Dr. Laura, even after President Biden set aside some funding for businesses to take care of employees, or at least encourage them to get vaccinated, that doesn't fall within those realms?
Again, if the employer chooses to do so, but based on the law, initially you had that CARES Act and it said no matter what, if you are an employer that employs 15 or more employees, you have to pay them for any sick leave due to COVID-19. That's not a mandate anymore. Biden is encouraging employers to use that based on the funding, but it's not required. And so that's That's the reality.
Ooh, girl, that sounds dicey. So what rights do employees have then? And I guess how do, they protect themselves once they return back to the office? Because, I mean, anxiety is up. We just did a report the other day. 41% of Americans are feeling anxious about where we are right now.
I mean, the reality is, the one thing that's wonderful about this virus is it's not that smart. I mean, we know that you can kill it with soap and alcohol. We know that social distancing and masking work. So I would encourage employees just to make sure they do what they can on their own accord to protect themselves, wearing a mask, socially distancing, keeping their hands clean. And it's also important to note that if there is, by some slim chance, you're one of the small minority of Americans that has an adverse impact or reaction to a vaccine, there is a program that was established by the government. It's called the Countermeasures Injury Compensation Program, and that allows you to recover up to $50,000 in damages in the event that you have an adverse reaction to the vaccine. Now, that might not be a lot of money to some people depending on the severity of the reactions, but there is a program in place. Again, you can just Google that name. So they're not totally exonerating you or preventing you from any legal protections. They're just very limited in this situation.
All right. Well, Dr. Laura, let's actually take a few steps back to the original topic, which is employers mandating that their employees get vaccinated. What if someone just says, hey, for religious reasons, I can't get vaccinated? Is there any protection with that?
Yes, there is a religious exemption to vaccines. We've seen that in K-12 schools with children having, their parents rather, having an objection, a religious objection to vaccines. But that requires you to provide evidentiary proof. You can't just say, oh, I object, it violates my religion. Typically, the courts are going to look for you to be a part of an established religion that historically has rejected the uses of vaccine. Typically, you would need evidence such as showing, look, I'm a member of this church. I've been a member of this church or this religion, for 20 years, 10 years. So it's not something people can easily manipulate. It does need to be a sincere religious belief in opposition to the vaccines. That is an exception.
All right. And so we'll slightly switch gears, but we'll stay on the pandemic, of course. What about wearing a mask? Because now we're seeing, religious organizations popping up saying, hey, it is against our religion to cover your God-given beautiful face. We want to see your face. Is that enough to hold up in court, considering the fact that we're in the middle of a pandemic?
I don't think it is. What I've been seeing, there was a recent lawsuit that was filed in which they said that their face is God's own image, and by requiring a mask mandate shields that image, which is a very strong part of their religious beliefs. I have to caution in saying these are cases of first impression. The court system has never had to consider these types of legal challenges. But I believe very strongly that because we are in a pandemic, that courts are going to rely very heavily on CDC recommended guidelines, number one. And number two, they're going to look at whether or not a mask policy is neutral or whether it targets specific individuals. We know that mask policies are neutral. They're not aimed to target any particular part of the population. And so I don't think that courts are going to overturn mask use. Again, I could be wrong because there's no precedent to show us how the court might rule. But I think because we're in a pandemic, that's going to heavily influence those judicial decisions.
All right, Dr. Laura, I do have one more question. I know my producer's probably going to kill me, and you might kill me as well, so I'm going to be fast about it. Considering the fact that we're seeing cases surge across the country, could we see the Biden administration enforce some type of a mask mandate on the federal level? And if so, do states have to adhere to it, or can they fight it?
Yeah, so Tashani, the general rule in law is federal always trumps state. So technically, yes, the Biden administration could issue a national mask mandate. The likelihood that he's going to do that, very slim, because that would be a political storm beyond all storms. And so I think he will continue to encourage mask mandates, to encourage states to create mandates. But as far as a national mandate, I think it would be too much of a political storm for him to do so.
It's so sad that this pandemic has become so politicized. Dr. Laura, always a pleasure. Thank you.